Yuri Gagarin. Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin, the 9th of March 1934 to the 27th of March 1968, was a Soviet pilot and cosmonaut who, aboard the first successful crewed spaceflight, became the first human to journey into outer space. Traveling on Vostok 1, Gagarin completed one orbit of Earth on the 12th of April 1961, with his flight taking 108 minutes. By achieving this major milestone for the Soviet Union amidst the space race, he became an international celebrity and was awarded many medals and titles, including his nation's highest distinction, Hero of the Soviet Union. Hailing from the village of Klushino in the Russian SFSR, Gagarin was a foundryman at a steel plant in Lubitsy in his youth. He later joined the Soviet Air Forces as a pilot and was stationed at the Luostari Air Base, near the Norway-Soviet Union border, before his selection for the Soviet space program alongside 5 other cosmonauts. Following his spaceflight, Gagarin became the deputy training director of the Cosmonaut Training Center, which was later named after him. He was also elected as a deputy of the Soviet of the Union in 1962 and then to the Soviet of Nationalities, respectively the lower and upper chambers of the Supreme Soviet. Vostok 1 was Gagarin's only spaceflight, but he served as the backup crew to Soyuz 1, which ended in a fatal crash, killing his friend and fellow cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov. Fearful that a high-level national hero might be killed, Soviet officials banned Gagarin from participating in further spaceflights. After completing training at the Zhukovsky Air Force Engineering Academy in February 1968, he was again allowed to fly regular aircraft. However, Gagarin died 5 weeks later, when the MiG-15 that he was piloting with flight instructor Vladimir Seryogin crashed near the town of Kurzak. Early life. Gagarin was born the 9th of March 1934 in the village of Klushino, in the Smolensk Oblast of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, near Jask, renamed Gagarin in 1968 after his death. His parents worked on a Sokhoz, Alexey Ivanovich Gagarin as a carpenter and Anna Timofeyevna Gagarina as a dairy farmer. Yuri was the third of 4 children. His older brother Valentin was born in 1924, and by the time Yuri was born he was already helping with the cattle on the farm. His sister Zoya, born in 1927, helped take care of Yura, and the youngest brother Boris, born in 1936. Like millions of Soviet citizens, his family suffered during the German occupation during World War II. During the German advance on Moscow, retreating Red Army soldiers seized the collective farm's livestock. The Nazis captured Klushino on 18 October 1941. On their first day in the village, they burned down the school, ending Yuri's first year of education. The Germans also burned down 27 houses in the village and forced the residents including the Gagarins to work the farms to feed the occupying soldiers. Those who refused were beaten or sent to the concentration camp set up at Jask. A Nazi officer took over the Gagarin residence. On the land behind their house, the family was allowed to build a mud hut measuring approximately 3 by 3 meters, 10 by 10 feet, where they spent 21 months until the end of the occupation. During this period, Yuri became a saboteur, especially after one of the German soldiers, called the Devil by the children, tried to hang his younger brother Boris on an apple tree using the boy's scarf. In retaliation, Yuri sabotaged the soldiers' work. He poured soil into the tank batteries gathered to be recharged and randomly mixed the different chemical supplies intended for the task. In early 1943, his 2 older siblings were deported by the Germans to Poland for slave labor. They escaped and were found by Soviet soldiers who conscripted them into helping with the war effort. They did not return home until after the war. In 1945, the rest of the Gagarin family believed the 2 older children were dead, and Yuri became ill with grief and hunger. He was also beaten for refusing to work for the German forces and spent the remainder of the war at a hospital as a patient and later as an orderly. His mother was hospitalized during the same period, after a German soldier gashed her leg with a scythe. When the Germans were routed out of Klushino on 9 March 1944, Yuri helped the Red Army find mines buried in the roads by the fleeing German army. Education and early career. In 1946, the family moved to Jask, where Gagarin continued his education. Yuri and Boris were enrolled at a crude school built in the town and run by a young woman who volunteered to be the teacher. They learned to read using a discarded Soviet military manual. A former Soviet airman later joined the school to teach maths and science, Yuri's favorite subjects. Yuri was also part of a group of children that built model aeroplanes. He was fascinated with aircraft from a young age, and his interest in aeroplanes was energized after a Yakovlev fighter plane crash landed in Klushino during the war. In 1950, aged 16, Gagarin began an apprenticeship as a foundryman at a steel plant in Lubitsy, near Moscow, and enrolled at a local young workers' school for 7th grade evening classes. After graduating in 1951 from both the 7th grade and the vocational school with honors in mold making and foundry work, he was selected for further training at the Industrial Technical School in Saratov, where he studied tractors. While in Saratov, Gagarin volunteered at a local flying club for weekend training as a Soviet air cadet, where he trained to fly a biplane, and later a Yakovlev Yak-18. He earned extra money as a part-time dock laborer on the Volga River. Soviet Air Force service. In 1955, Gagarin was accepted to the 1st Karlov Higher Air Force Pilots School in Orenburg. He initially began training on the Yak-18, already familiar to him, and later graduated to training on the MiG-15 in February 1956. Gagarin twice struggled to land the two-seater trainer aircraft, and risked dismissal from pilot training. However, the commander of the regiment decided to give him another chance at landing. Gagarin's flight instructor gave him a cushion to sit on, which improved his view from the cockpit, and he landed successfully. Having completed his evaluation in a trainer aircraft, Gagarin began flying solo in 1957. On 5 November 1957, Gagarin was commissioned a lieutenant in the Soviet Air Forces, having accumulated 166 hours and 47 minutes of flight time. He graduated from flight school the next day and was posted to the Luostari Air Base, close to the Norwegian border in Murmansk Oblast, for a 2-year assignment with the Northern Fleet. He was assigned to the 769th Fighter Aviation Regiment of the 122nd Fighter Aviation Division, flying Mikoyan Gurevich MiG-15 bis aircraft. By October 1959, he had flown a total of 265 hours. On 7 July 1959, he was rated military pilot 3rd class. After expressing interest in space exploration following the launch of Luna 3 on 6 October 1959, his recommendation to the Soviet space program was endorsed and forwarded by Lieutenant Colonel Babushkin. By this point, he had accumulated 265 hours of flight time. Gagarin was promoted to the rank of senior lieutenant on 6 November 1959, 3 weeks after he was interviewed by a medical commission for qualification to the space program. Soviet space program. Selection and training. Gagarin's selection for the Vostok program was overseen by the Central Flight Medical Commission led by Major General Konstantin Fyodorovich Borodin of the Soviet Army Medical Service. He underwent physical and psychological testing conducted at Central Aviation Scientific Research Hospital, in Moscow, commanded by Colonel A.S. Usanov, a member of the commission. The commission also included Colonel Yevgeny Anatolievich Karpov, who later commanded the training center, Colonel Vladimir Ivanovich Yazdowski, the head physician for Gagarin's flight, and Major General Alexander Nikolaevich Babichuk, a physician flag officer on the Soviet Air Force General Staff to the Commander-in-Chief of the Air Force. The commission limited their selection to pilots between 25 and 30 years old. The chief engineer of the program, Sergei Korolev, also specified that candidates, to fit in the limited space in the Vostok capsule, should weigh less than 72 kilograms, 159 pounds, and be no taller than 1.70 meters, 5 feet 7 in. Gagarin was 1.57 meters, 5 feet 2 in, tall. From a pool of 154 qualified pilots shortlisted by their Air Force units, the military physicians chose 29 cosmonaut candidates, of whom 20 were approved by the Credential Committee of the Soviet government. The first 12, including Gagarin, were approved on 7 March 1960 and 8 more were added in a series of subsequent orders issued until June. Gagarin began training at the Kodinka airfield in central Moscow on 15 March 1960. The training regimen involved vigorous and repetitive physical exercises which Alexei Leonov, a member of the initial group of 12, described as akin to training for the Olympic Games. In April 1960, they began parachute training in Saratov Oblast and each man completed about 40 to 50 jumps from both low and high altitude, over both land and water. Gagarin was a candidate favored by his peers. When they were asked to vote anonymously for a candidate besides themselves, they would like to be the first to fly. All but 3 chose Gagarin. One of these candidates, Yevgeny Krunov, believed that Gagarin was very focused and was demanding of himself and others when necessary. On 30 May 1960, Gagarin was further selected for an accelerated training group, known as the Vanguard 6 or Sochi 6, from which the first cosmonauts of the Vostok program would be chosen. The other members of the group were Anatoly Kartashov, Andriy Nikolaev, Pavel Popovich, German Titov, and Valentin Varlamov. However, Kartashov and Varlamov were injured and replaced by Krunov and Grigory Nelubov. As several of the candidates selected for the program including Gagarin did not have higher education degrees, they were enrolled in a correspondence course program at the Zhukovsky Air Force Engineering Academy. Gagarin enrolled in September 1960 and did not earn his specialist diploma until early 1968. Gagarin was also subjected to experiments that were designed to test physical and psychological endurance, including oxygen starvation tests in which the cosmonauts were locked in an isolation chamber and the air slowly pumped out. He also trained for the upcoming flight by experiencing G-forces in a centrifuge. Psychological tests included placing the candidates in an anechoic chamber in complete isolation. Gagarin was in the chamber from 26 July to 5 August. In August 1960, a Soviet Air Force doctor evaluated his personality as follows: modest, embarrasses when his humor gets a little too racy, high degree of intellectual development evident in Yuri, fantastic memory, distinguishes himself from his colleagues by his sharp and far-ranging sense of attention to his surroundings, a well-developed imagination, quick reactions, persevering, prepares himself painstakingly for his activities and training exercises, handles celestial mechanics and mathematical formulae with ease as well as excels in higher mathematics, does not feel constrained when he has to defend his point of view if he considers himself right, appears that he understands life better than a lot of his friends. The Vanguard 6 were given the title of pilot cosmonaut in January 1961 and underwent a 2-day examination conducted by a special interdepartmental commission led by Lieutenant General Nikolai Kamenin, the overseer of the Vostok program. The commission was tasked with ranking the candidates based on their mission readiness for the first human Vostok mission. On 17 January, they were tested in a simulator at the Gromov Flight Research Institute on a full-size mock-up of the Vostok capsule. Gagarin, Nikolaev, Popovich, and Titov all received excellent marks on the first day of testing, in which they were required to describe the various phases of the mission followed by questions from the commission. On the second day, they were given a written examination, following which the special commission ranked Gagarin as the best candidate. He and the next 2 highest-ranked cosmonauts, Titov and Nelubov, were sent to Tyuratam for final preparations. Gagarin and Titov were selected to train in the flight-ready spacecraft on 7 April. Historian Asif Azam Siddiqui writes of the final selection. In the end, at the State Commission meeting on April 8, Kamenin stood up and formally nominated Gagarin as the primary pilot and Titov as his backup. Without much discussion, the Commission approved the proposal and moved on to other last-minute logistical issues. It was assumed that in the event Gagarin developed health problems prior to liftoff, Titov would take his place, with Nelubov acting as his backup. Vostok 1. On 12 April 1961, at 6:07 am Coordinated Universal Time, the Vostok 3 Ka-3, Vostok 1 spacecraft was launched from Baikonur Cosmodrome. Aboard was Gagarin, the first human to travel into space, using the call sign Keda, Siberian pine or cedar. The radio communication between the launch control room and Gagarin included the following dialogue at the moment of rocket launch: Korolev, preliminary stage, intermediate, main. Lift off. We wish you a good flight. Everything's all right. Gagarin, off we go. Goodbye. Until soon, dear friends. Gagarin's farewell to Korolev using the informal phrase Poikali. Poali, off we go, later became a popular expression in the Eastern Bloc that was used to refer to the beginning of the space age. The 5 first-stage engines fired until the first separation event, when the 4 side boosters fell away, leaving the core engine. The core stage then separated while the rocket was in a suborbital trajectory, and the upper stage carried it to orbit. Once the upper stage finished firing, it separated from the spacecraft, which orbited for 108 minutes before returning to Earth in Kazakhstan. Gagarin became the first human to orbit the Earth. The feeling of weightlessness was somewhat unfamiliar compared with Earth conditions. Here, you feel as if you were hanging in a horizontal position in straps. You feel as if you are suspended, Gagarin wrote in his post-flight report. He also wrote in his autobiography released the same year that he sang the tune "The Motherland Hears, the Motherland Knows, Rodina Slice It, Rodina Zanat," during re-entry. Gagarin was recognized as a qualified military pilot first class and promoted to the rank of major in a special order given during his flight. At about 7,000 meters, 23,000 feet, Gagarin ejected from the descending capsule as planned and landed using a parachute. There were concerns Gagarin's orbital spaceflight records for duration, altitude and lifted mass would not be recognized by the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale, FAI, the world governing body for setting standards and keeping records in the field, which at the time required that the pilot land with the craft. Gagarin and Soviet officials initially refused to admit that he had not landed with his spacecraft, an omission which became apparent after Titov's flight on Vostok 2 4 months later. Gagarin's spaceflight records were nonetheless certified and reaffirmed by the FAI, which revised its rules, and acknowledged that the crucial steps of the safe launch, orbit, and return of the pilot had been accomplished. Gagarin is internationally recognized as the first human in space and first to orbit the Earth. After the Vostok 1 flight, Gagarin's flight was a triumph for the Soviet space program and he became a national hero of the Soviet Union and Eastern Bloc, as well as a worldwide celebrity. Newspapers around the globe published his biography and details of his flight. He was escorted in a long motorcade of high-ranking officials through the streets of Moscow to the Kremlin where, in a lavish ceremony, Nikita Khrushchev awarded him the title Hero of the Soviet Union. Other cities in the Soviet Union also held mass demonstrations, the scale of which was second only to the World War II victory parades. Gagarin gained a reputation as an adept public figure and was noted for his charismatic smile. On 15 April 1961, accompanied by officials from the Soviet Academy of Sciences, he answered questions at a press conference in Moscow reportedly attended by 1,000 reporters. Gagarin visited the United Kingdom 3 months after the Vostok 1 mission, going to London and Manchester. While in Manchester, despite heavy rain, he refused an umbrella, insisted that the roof of the convertible car he was riding in remain open, and stood so the cheering crowds could see him. Gagarin toured widely abroad, accepting the invitation of about 30 countries in the years following his flight. In just the first 4 months, he also went to Brazil, Bulgaria, Canada, Cuba, Czechoslovakia, Finland, Hungary, and Iceland. Because of his popularity, U.S. President John F. Kennedy barred Gagarin from visiting the United States. In 1962, Gagarin began serving as a deputy to the Soviet of the Union, and was elected to the Central Committee of the Young Communist League. He later returned to Star City, the cosmonaut facility, where he spent several years working on designs for a reusable spacecraft. He became a lieutenant colonel of the Soviet Air Forces on 12 June 1962, and received the rank of colonel on 6 November 1963. On 20 December, Gagarin became deputy training director of the cosmonaut training facility. Soviet officials, including Kamenin, tried to keep Gagarin away from any flights, being worried about losing their hero in an accident, noting that he was too dear to mankind to risk his life for the sake of an ordinary spaceflight. Kamenin was also concerned by Gagarin's drinking and believed the sudden rise to fame had taken its toll on the cosmonaut. While acquaintances say Gagarin had been a sensible drinker, his touring schedule placed him in social situations in which he was increasingly expected to drink alcohol. 2 years later, he was re-elected as a deputy of the Soviet Union, but this time to the Soviet of Nationalities, the upper chamber of legislature. The following year, he began to re-qualify as a fighter pilot and was backup pilot for his friend Vladimir Komarov on the Soyuz 1 flight after 5 years without piloting duty. Kamenin had opposed Gagarin's reassignment to cosmonaut training. He had gained weight and his flying skills had deteriorated. Despite this, he remained a strong contender for Soyuz 1 until he was replaced by Komarov in April 1966 and reassigned to Soyuz 3. The Soyuz 1 launch was rushed due to implicit political pressures and despite Gagarin's protests that additional safety precautions were necessary. Gagarin accompanied Komarov to the rocket before launch and relayed instructions to Komarov from ground control following multiple system failures aboard the spacecraft. Despite their best efforts, Soyuz 1 crash-landed after its parachutes failed to open, killing Komarov instantly. After the Soyuz 1 crash, Gagarin was permanently banned from training for and participating in further spaceflights. He was also grounded from flying aircraft solo, a demotion he worked hard to lift. He was temporarily relieved of duties to focus on academics with the promise that he would be able to resume flight training. On 17 February 1968, Gagarin successfully defended his aerospace engineering thesis on the subject of spaceplane aerodynamic configuration and graduated cum laude from the Zhukovsky Air Force Engineering Academy. Personal life. In 1957, while a cadet in flight school, Gagarin met Valentina Goryacheva at the May Day celebrations at the Red Square in Moscow. She was a medical technician who had graduated from Orenburg Medical School. They were married on 7 November of the same year, the same day Gagarin graduated from his flight school. Valentina and Yuri had 2 daughters. Yelena Yurievna Gagarina, born 1959, is an art historian who has worked as the Director General of the Moscow Kremlin Museums since 2001, and Galina Yurievna Gagarina, born 1961, is a professor of economics and the department chair at Plekhanov Russian University of Economics in Moscow. Following his rise to fame, at a Black Sea resort in September 1961, he was reportedly caught by his wife during a liaison with a nurse who had aided him after a boating incident. He attempted to escape through a window and jumped off a second-floor balcony. The resulting injury left a permanent scar above his left eyebrow. In his youth, Gagarin was a keen sportsman and played ice hockey as a goalkeeper. He was also a basketball fan and coached the Saratov Industrial Technical School team, as well as being a referee. Some Soviet sources have said that Gagarin commented during his spaceflight, "I don't see any God up here," though no such words appear in the verbatim record of his conversations with Earth stations during the spaceflight. In a 2006 interview, Gagarin's friend Colonel Valentin Petrov stated that Gagarin never said these words and that the quote originated from Khrushchev's speech at the plenum of the Central Committee of the CPSU about the state's anti-religion campaign, saying, "Gagarin flew into space, but didn't see any God there." Petrov also said Gagarin had been baptized into the Russian Orthodox Church as a child, and a 2011 Foma magazine article quoted the rector of the Orthodox Church in Star City saying, Gagarin baptized his elder daughter Yelena shortly before his spaceflight, and his family used to celebrate Christmas and Easter and keep icons in the house. Nevertheless, Gagarin's officially sanctioned autobiography, released by the USSR's state publishing house in 1961, includes a passage that upholds the official Soviet position on religious belief. The manned spaceflight was a crushing blow to the churchmen. In the streams of letters that addressed to me, I was pleased to read confessions in which believers, impressed by the achievements of science, renounced God, agreed that there is no God and everything connected with his name is fiction and nonsense. Death. On 27 March 1968, while on a routine training flight from Karlovsky Air Base, Gagarin and flight instructor Vladimir Seryogin died when their MiG-15 UT crashed near the town of Kurzak. The bodies of Gagarin and Seryogin were cremated and their ashes interred in the walls of the Kremlin. Wrapped in secrecy, the cause of the crash that killed Gagarin is uncertain and became the subject of speculation, including several conspiracy theories. At least 3 investigations into the crash were conducted separately by the Air Force, official government commissions, and the KGB. According to a biography of Gagarin by Jamie Doran and Piers Bisoni, Starman, the truth behind the legend of Yuri Gagarin, the KGB worked, not just alongside the Air Force and the official commission members but against them. The KGB's report, declassified in March 2003, claimed that the actions of airbase personnel contributed to the crash. The report states that an air traffic controller provided Gagarin with outdated weather information and that by the time of his flight, conditions had deteriorated significantly. Ground crew also left external fuel tanks attached to the aircraft. Gagarin's planned flight activities needed clear weather and no outboard tanks. The investigation concluded Gagarin's aircraft entered a spin, either due to a bird strike or because of a sudden move to avoid another aircraft. Because of the out-of-date weather report, the crew believed their altitude was higher than it was and could not react properly to bring the MiG-15 out of its spin. Another theory, advanced in 2005 by the original crash investigator, hypothesizes that a cabin air vent was accidentally left open by the crew or the previous pilot, leading to oxygen deprivation and leaving the crew incapable of controlling the aircraft. A similar theory, published in Air and Space, Smithsonian Magazine, is that the crew detected the open vent and followed procedure by executing a rapid dive to a lower altitude. This dive caused them to lose consciousness and crash. On 12 April 2007, the Kremlin vetoed a new investigation into the death of Gagarin. Government officials said they saw no reason to begin a new investigation. In April 2011, documents from a 1968 commission set up by the Central Committee of the Communist Party to investigate the accident were declassified. The documents revealed that the commission's original conclusion was that Gagarin or Seryogin had maneuvered sharply, either to avoid a weather balloon or to avoid entry into the upper limit of the first layer of cloud cover, leading the jet into supercritical flight regime and to its stalling in complex meteorological conditions. Alexei Leonov, who was also a member of a state commission established to investigate Gagarin's death, was conducting parachute training sessions that day and heard 2 loud booms in the distance. He believes that a Sukhoi Su-15 was flying below its minimum altitude and, without realizing it because of the terrible weather conditions, he passed within 10 or 20 meters, 33 or 66 feet, of Yuri and Serygin's plane while breaking the sound barrier. The resulting turbulence would have sent the MiG-15 UT into an uncontrolled spin. Leonov said the first boom he heard was that of the jet breaking the sound barrier and the second was Gagarin's plane crashing. Awards and honors. Medals and Orders of Merit. On 14 April 1961, Gagarin was honored with a 12-mile (19 kilometers) parade attended by millions of people that concluded at the Red Square. After a short speech, he was bestowed the Hero of the Soviet Union, Order of Lenin, Merited Master of Sports of the Soviet Union and the first pilot cosmonaut of the USSR. On 15 April, the Soviet Academy of Sciences awarded him with the Konstantin Tsiolkovsky Gold Medal, named after the Russian pioneer of space aeronautics. Gagarin had also been awarded 4 Soviet commemorative medals over the course of his career. He was honored as a Hero of Socialist Labor from Czechoslovakia on 29 April 1961, and Hero of Socialist Labor, Bulgaria, including the Order of Georgy Dimitrov, the same year. On the 8th anniversary of the beginning of the Cuban Revolution, the 26th of July, President Osvaldo Dorticos of Cuba presented him with the First Order of Playa Girón, a newly created medal. Gagarin was also awarded the 1960 Gold Air Medal and the 1961 de la Vaux Medal from the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale in Switzerland. He received numerous awards from other nations that year, including the Star of the Republic of Indonesia, 2nd class, the Order of the Cross of Grunwald, 1st degree, in Poland, the Order of the Flag of the People's Republic of Hungary, 1st class with diamonds, the Hero of Labor Award from Democratic Republic of Vietnam, the Italian Columbus Day Medal, and a gold medal from the British Interplanetary Society. President Jânio Quadros of Brazil decorated Gagarin on 2 August 1961 with the Order of Aeronautical Merit, Commander Grade. During a tour of Egypt in late January 1962, Gagarin received the Order of the Nile and the Golden Keys to the Gates of Cairo. On the 22nd of October 1963, Gagarin and Valentina Tereshkova were honored with the Order of Karl Marx from the German Democratic Republic. Tributes. The date of Gagarin's spaceflight, the 12th of April, has been commemorated. Since 1962, it has been celebrated first in the USSR and since 1991 in Russia and some other former Soviet republics as Cosmonautics Day. Since 2000, Yuri's Night, an international celebration, is held annually to commemorate milestones in space exploration. In 2011, it was declared the International Day of Human Spaceflight by the United Nations. A number of buildings and locations have been named for Gagarin, mostly in Russia but also in other Soviet republics. The Yuri Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center in Star City was named on 30 April 1968. The launch pad at Baikonur Cosmodrome from which Sputnik 1 and Vostok 1 were launched is now known as Gagarin Start. Gagarin Rayon in Sevastopol was named after him during the period of the Soviet Union. The Russian Air Force Academy was renamed the Gagarin Air Force Academy in 1968. The town of Jask where he lived in Smolensk Oblast was renamed Gagarin after his death in 1968. And has since become home to numerous museums and monuments to him. A street in Warsaw, Poland, is called Yuri Gagarin Street. The town of Gagarin, Armenia was renamed in his honor in 1961. Gagarin has been honored on the Moon by astronauts and astronomers. During the American space program's Apollo 11 mission in 1969, astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin left a memorial satchel containing medals commemorating Gagarin and Komarov on the Moon's surface. In 1971, Apollo 15 astronauts David Scott and James Irwin left the small fallen astronaut sculpture at their landing site as a memorial to the American astronauts and Soviet cosmonauts who died in the space race. The names on its plaque included Yuri Gagarin and 14 others. In 1970, a 262 kilometers (163 miles) wide crater on the far side was named after him. Gagarin was inducted as a member of the 1976 inaugural class of the International Space Hall of Fame in New Mexico. Gagarin is memorialized in music. A cycle of Soviet patriotic songs titled The Constellation Gagarin, Sozvezda Gagarina, was written by Alexandra Pakhmutova and Nikolai Dobronravov in 1970–1971. The most famous of these songs refers to Gagarin's Poyakali. In the lyrics, he said, "Let's go." He waved his hand. He was the inspiration for the pieces, Hey Gagarin, by Jean-Michel Jarre on Metamorphoses, Gagarin, by Public Service Broadcasting, and Gagarin, I Loved You, by Underwood. Vessels have been named for Gagarin. Soviet tracking ship Kosmonov Yuri Gagarin was built in 1971 and the Armenian airline Armavia named their first Sukhoi Superjet 100 in his honor in 2011. Two commemorative coins were issued in the Soviet Union to honor the 20th and 30th anniversaries of his flight, a 1 ruble coin in copper-nickel, 1981, and a 3 ruble coin in silver, 1991. In 2001, to commemorate the 40th anniversary of Gagarin's flight, a series of 4 coins bearing his likeness was issued in Russia. It consisted of a 2 ruble coin in copper-nickel, a 3 ruble coin in silver, a 10 ruble coin in brass, copper and nickel, and a 100 ruble coin in silver. In 2011, Russia issued a 1,000 ruble coin in gold and a 3 ruble coin in silver to mark the 50th anniversary of his flight. In 2008, the Russia-based Continental Hockey League named their championship trophy the Gagarin Cup. In a 2010 Space Foundation survey, Gagarin was ranked as the 6th most popular space hero, tied with the fictional character James T. Kirk from Star Trek. A Russian docudrama titled Gagarin, First in Space was released in 2013. Previous attempts at portraying Gagarin were disallowed. His family took legal action over his portrayal in a fictional drama and vetoed a musical. Statues, monuments and murals. There are statues of Gagarin and monuments to him located in the town named after him, as well as in Orenburg, Cheboksary, Irkutsk, Ijevsk, Komsomolsk-on-Amur, and Yoshkar-Ola in Russia, as well as in Nicosia, Cyprus, Druzhkivka, Ukraine, Karaganda, Kazakhstan, and Tiraspol, Moldova. On 4 June 1980, monument to Yuri Gagarin in Gagarin Square, Leninsky Avenue, Moscow, was opened. The monument is mounted to a 38 meters (125 feet) tall pedestal and is constructed of titanium. Beside the column is a replica of the descent module used during his spaceflight. In 2011, a statue of Gagarin was unveiled at Admiralty Arch in the Mall in London, opposite the permanent sculpture of James Cook. It is a copy of the statue outside Gagarin's former school in Lubitsy. In 2013, the statue was moved to a permanent location outside the Royal Observatory, Greenwich. In 2012, a statue was unveiled at the site of NASA's original spaceflight headquarters on South Wayside Drive in Houston. The sculpture was completed in 2011 by Leonov, who is also an artist, and was a gift to Houston commissioned by various Russian organizations. Houston Mayor Anais Parker, NASA Administrator Charles Bolden, and Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak were present for the dedication. The Russian Federation presented a bust of Gagarin to several cities in India, including one that was unveiled at the Birla Planetarium in Kolkata in February 2012. In April 2018, a bust of Gagarin erected on the street in Belgrade, Serbia, that bears his name was removed, after less than a week. A new work was commissioned following the outcry over the disproportionately small size of its head, which locals said was an insult to Gagarin. Belgrade city manager Goran Vesic stated that neither the city, the Serbian Ministry of Culture, nor the foundation that financed it had prior knowledge of the design. In August 2019, the Italian artist Jorit painted Gagarin's face on the facade of a 20-story building in the district of Odintsovo, Russia. The mural is the largest portrait of Gagarin in the world. In March 2021, a statue of Gagarin was unveiled at Mataram Park, Taman Mataram, in Jakarta, Indonesia, in celebration of the 70th anniversary of Indonesia-Russia diplomatic relations as well as the 60th anniversary of the first human spaceflight. The statue, sculpted by Russian artist A.D. Leonov and presented by Russian Embassy in Jakarta, is considered as a sign of strengthening relations between Moscow and Jakarta, which have been sister cities since 2006. 50th anniversary. The 50th anniversary of Gagarin's journey into space was marked in 2011 by tributes around the world. A documentary film titled First Orbit was shot from the International Space Station, combining sound recordings from the original flight with footage of the route taken by Gagarin. The Russian, American, and Italian crew of Expedition 27 aboard the ISS sent a special video message to wish the people of the world a Happy Yuri's Night, wearing shirts with an image of Gagarin. The Central Bank of the Russian Federation released gold and silver coins to commemorate the anniversary. The Soyuz TMA-21 spacecraft was named Gagarin with the launch in April 2011 to coincide with the 50th anniversary of his mission.